Perfect. My name is Jordy Izzard, and I'm here today as a SAIS Alumni Relations Officer with Sam Rea, who graduated from SAIS 50 years ago. He's celebrating his anniversary, and that was in the class of 1963.
Yes.
He was in Washington, D.C. for 2 years at that time. And today's date is April 11th, 2013.
Yes.
And we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation.
Good.
So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jordy.
Okay.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and maybe just let's start with what originally brought you to SAIS.
I had a growing interest in sub-Saharan Africa, which came about because of the independence of Ghana. The Gold Coast became Ghana in 1956. And I happened to have a year abroad at that point. I was studying in England. So it was a big deal in the British press that Ghana, the first colony, had become fully independent in Nkrumah, and a very charismatic guy. So I had been following and was aware of Africa, even though I was a high school and then undergraduate student. Did a thesis at Princeton for the Department of History on the British policy of bringing light to the darkness, their policy of education in the Gold Coast prior to independence. And what did that really mean and say about colonialism as a whole? Princeton had nobody on the history department faculty that knew anything about Africa, with one exception. And this is a very well-known historian of European diplomatic history, Gordon Craig, who had worked at the OSS in the Second World War on how to relieve Montgomery's troops in Egypt at the time of the war with the Germans. And so he had studied all about the Congo River and all the tributaries, and that's all anyone on the history faculty at Princeton knew about. I figured Africa was coming online. All these countries had become independent in 1960. Nobody really knew very much about Africa. I was interested. Why not do more, learn more, and see where it goes from there? And so SAIS, and this I think is interesting because it may not be remembered, was one of the 5 centers in the United States, along with UCLA, Wisconsin, Boston University, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins, to have federal funding to set up studies in sub-Saharan Africa. So I came here, and that's why.
That's great. Well, we're happy to have you here. Tell us, maybe in thinking about those years when you were here, 62 and 63, what are some of your memories of being here in D.C. and of being at SAIS in that context?
I think there are really 3 things that made a big difference in my life that SAIS did. One certainly was the broadening from my perspective as an undergraduate in the history department at a university in the East, the broadening out to public affairs, international affairs, political and economic development. And the resources here in Washington were unparalleled. It was a time, the most exciting time probably in modern history in Washington. The Kennedy administration had just come online. 30 African countries had just become independents. So much to learn, and so many people here who were thinking about that, along with all the other issues which were important at the day. And I was thinking back on the time. What were the other really important issues? Well, the Cold War was certainly one of them. The developing European Union was certainly another one of them. Cuba was very much in the headlines at that time. And Berlin, for example, the wall had gone up in the summer before I arrived here. So these were some of the hot issues, and I think that the resources brought to bear on these issues, besides taking together the World Bank and the U.S. government and the Smithsonian and the National Geographic Association, all these were brought to bear on issues that we cared about. That was the first thing. Second thing, of course, certainly was Africa. I came here to study Africa. There were at that time 2 core faculty members. One was Bob Lystad, who later became a dean at SAIS, and a man named Vernon McKay, who had long experience in South Africa previous to coming here. they were the core faculty, and they taught about the United Nations, they taught about Bob Lystat, all about anthropology, about sociology, about the history of Africa, and so forth. And then they attracted people from the community. Wonderful person from the State Department, his name is Bob Good, who taught the politics of East Africa and then next term the politics of West Africa, and could bring that kind of experience to bear. One of the most impressive of all the faculty members is everyone, making these recordings will say, I think it was Isaiah Frank. Mm-hmm. He gave a marvelous course, very comprehensible course. I must say it had nothing to do with calculus, as it would today, which I'm not saying is a strength, but it was a marvelous way of looking at economic development from many different angles, and it was just what was needed for Africa. The third thing was that it was here that I really decided what to do with the rest of my life, and that included the people I met here and the people later on in my career that I met who had been to SAIS. So I think these are the three things: the broadening, the deepening in the sense of Africa, going as deeply as I could in 2 years here, and then the future. Mm-hmm. What do I do now?
And did you at that time have to know a language?
Yes.
What was your language?
Thank you for asking the question.
Sure.
Because of the 3 or 4 best people at SAIS, one was the French department. And it was a single-man French department as far as I knew. His name was Marc Moyen. He was an internationally known translator, simultaneous translations and so forth, and he knew all about that. Plus, he was an extremely cultivated kind of man, and you visited his house, and it was just a gold mine of culture. It was just wonderful. And he had extreme discipline. He knew exactly what to teach. He knew how to engage the students in reading articles, writing about them, speaking about them. So at the end of the year, because I was only in French for a year with him, it was one of the best things I took away. And when we get to maybe what did I do next, it certainly came in handy.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great segue.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk for a little bit about your career? So when you graduated in '63, how did you get started and what direction did it go?
Well, a bit for comic relief, I had been in school for something like 18 or 19 straight years by the time I finished SAIS. I was ready for a break, and so I went to Camp Lejeune in Paris Island for 6 months of the Marine Corps Reserve, which was the break I needed, and following that I went to Columbia University for a PhD program. And the reason for that was that Columbia was one of the other concentration centers in the United States. They had 2 excellent people, Greg Cowan on the political side, and Emanuel Wallerstein, who was a great thinker on culture and on political parties, all that. And I went to Columbia, took political science, comparative government as a major, and political theory as a minor. And I think I did that out of the sense that I would get a chance to teach later on in my career, and I wanted to be ready for that. I didn't know when, or I didn't know where, but if the chance came, I wanted to be certified to teach. This is debatable, but I think at that time you needed to have a PhD to teach in colleges and so forth. But that led us directly through the field research into USAID. And I applied for a position in Tanzania when Julius Nyerere was the president there. So I wanted to study in a country which was run by an extremely good person, and Julius Nyerere was an extremely wonderful person at the time as president. He made some and I wanted to explore how you could use education in development. And so my thesis was to be about the politics of education. Everyone knows how political education is, and primary education in developing countries is no exception. How are resources divided up in independent Tanzania between the regions of the country? And so that was approved at Columbia. I went out and I had a job for 2 years, sponsored by USAID, and I was on their payroll, to work in the Ministry of Education, right in an office, right in the ministry, where I could learn from the people that were doing it, what was going on. And this then led to a career with USAID, because after the thesis was over, was looking for a place to teach, and they say, well, the ambassador from Tanzania said, I'm going down to Botswana as ambassador. I knew you in Tanzania. Why don't you come and set up an aid program for me? So I went down to Botswana and helped to set up the AID, Economic Assistance Program, in Botswana for a period of 2.5 years. I then came back looking for a place to teach, which I was going to do at a place called Dag Hammarskjöld College in Columbia, Maryland. And it went bankrupt. As soon as I arrived, they gave me a slip saying, we love you, but we're not here anymore. So I went back to AID, and they said, well, great, we're setting up a program of development for the 8 countries south of the Sahara, the Sahel Development Program. They've been a disastrous drought. We need to do something, and we don't want to just do it on a handout basis. We want to actually institute development so that it won't happen as bad again. So for the next 4 years, I worked on setting up a program of development in many different sectors with many different donors, especially the French. Of course, and here's where Marc Moyenne came in handy. Mm-hmm. And so that led to an assignment to Paris to work in the embassy on figuring out how the French did foreign assistance. And my job was to visit all of the components of their foreign assistance program and write a airgram, as they called it, to AID missions across the world saying, this is how the French do foreign assistance. In case you're working with them, you'll understand it better. That took about a year. And I was looking for a place to go, and the man who had set up the Sahel Development Program had moved on as mission director in Senegal, which was to be the key country in the Sahelian region for development. He said, I need a person to help me. Will you come? So I moved down there, picked up my wife there, who was on the staff, and worked with her. She was here today. And then I was looking for maybe a teaching job someplace, and it looked as if this little island, I thought, off the coast of East Africa was about ready to open up, and that was Madagascar, which is 1,000 miles long and the 4th largest island in the world. And the leader, Didier Ritsirka, was just turning back to the West, having had a fling with China and Russia, going bankrupt in the meantime, turned back to the World Bank and to the Western donors and said, come help me, bail me out. So we opened up a AID program on the island of Madagascar. That took another 4 years. Mm-hmm. And about that time, frankly, I was looking for something else to do outside of Africa. I was not feeling very well. Developed hearing problems, heart problems. And so they took me into what is called the Global Bureau, which was the Office of Education, and said, help us here for 4 years. I've managed that office. And that brought in the interest I had in education. And that led, after I had a light heart attack that I couldn't go overseas, they assigned me to the National Defense University, where I ended up teaching political science and African area studies. And so it all sort of came together, but the good thing is it really all started at SAIS, and that's my story.
That's great. That's terrific. And in thinking about the wonderful career you've had and your experiences at SAIS and in your PhD even, tell us, if you think about current students today, what advice might you have for them? What might you have done differently, or what would you underscore that you really should do?
I'll just say one thing, because otherwise I think that what's really good now, which we did not have then, is an intern program. So to the extent you can participate with an outfit that you're interested in possibly joining, especially in a summer internship program, but also either sides of that summer, to learn about that institution, let them learn about you. That's going to pay dividends. Mm-hmm. So, and I think you've got in place here at SAIS now. We had a nephew that came here in the 90s.
Oh, great.
And he was interested in the U.S. Treasury.
What's his name?
Cameron Haight, H-A-I-G-H-T. Mm-hmm. And he took Arabic, starting at Middlebury, continuing it here. He had 2 years at Cairo before he came to SAIS. He was fluent in Arabic. He studied under Ajami and joined the Treasury as the desk officer for Egypt. And so when Larry Summers had the finance minister from Egypt visit, Cameron was right there with him. That was a wonderful thing that SAIS did for him.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and
Well,
congratulations on 50 years from having graduated from SAIS and all you've done to help the world.
Well, I don't know about that.